Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the freezing pre-dawn darkness of a medieval castle, where you're about to discover why being a castle guard wasn't the romantic, sword-waving adventure movies promised you. You're stumbling through pitch-black corridors, your breath fogging in the icy air, while somewhere in the distance a rooster screams its hatred of your existence. Your chainmail, which you haven't taken off in 3 days because nobody told you how to get out of it properly, chafes against skin that's already raw and possibly infected. Welcome to guard duty, where the glory lasts about 15 seconds and the misery stretches across 12-hour shifts that feel like geological epochs. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how this little community spans the globe, from someone in Tokyo having their morning coffee to someone in Brazil winding down their evening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's 4:30 in the morning, or at least you think it is, because nobody's invented accurate timekeeping yet and the castle relies on a guy who watches candles burn down to guess when shifts change. You've been asleep for maybe 3 hours on a straw mattress that smells like the collective sweat of every guard who's used it for the past decade, which is probably accurate because medieval laundry standards are basically wait until it can stand up by itself, then maybe rinse it in the river. The sergeant, a man whose face looks like it's been carved from particularly angry granite, is bellowing your name along with 15 other names, and you have approximately 90 seconds to get yourself together before he starts handing out punishments. You roll off your mattress and immediately step in something wet. You don't investigate what it is. In medieval castles, ignorance isn't just bliss, it's a survival strategy. The guardroom where you sleep is carved into the castle walls, a stone chamber that maintains a constant temperature of hypothermia waiting to happen. There are no windows because windows are structural weaknesses, and there's no heating because the concept of workers' comfort won't be invented for another 600 years. Someone's already awake, vomiting into a bucket in the corner. You don't know if it's illness or just how his body reacts to waking up at this hour. Honestly, you're not sure there's a difference. You grab your gambeson, that's the padded jacket that goes under your chainmail, and discover it's still damp from yesterday's rain. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually understood germ theory in any meaningful way, but you're about to get a practical education in what happens when you wear wet fabric against your skin for 12 hours straight. The dampness isn't just uncomfortable. It's cold enough to make your bones ache, and by hour 3 of your shift, you'll have developed a cough that sounds like you're trying to expel a small demon from your lungs. The chainmail comes next, and this is where the true nightmare begins. You know how in movies, warriors just slip chainmail on like a slightly heavy sweater? That's hilarious fiction. Real chainmail weighs anywhere from 30 to 45 pounds, depending on how much your lord decided you're worth protecting, and putting it on by yourself is like trying to wrestle an octopus made of metal. You have to kind of sit down, drape it over your head and shoulders, then wiggle and shimmy until it settles into place. The whole process takes about 5 minutes and leaves you sweating and breathing hard before your shift has even started. One of the more experienced guards usually helps the newer guys, but he's not doing it out of kindness. He's doing it because if you're late to muster, the sergeant punishes everyone, and nobody wants to spend the morning doing extra drills because you couldn't figure out which hole your head goes through. Your chainmail is also not fitted to you specifically because you're not important enough for custom armor. You're wearing whatever was lying around in the armory that approximately matched your body size. This means the sleeves are probably too long, the hem hits you at an awkward spot on your thighs, and there's a section over your left shoulder where one of the rings is broken and occasionally catches on your gambeson. You'll discover that broken ring around hour 6 of your shift when it finally pinches your skin hard enough to draw blood. Speaking of blood, your hands are already a mess and it's barely dawn. Medieval guards developed this distinctive pattern of calluses and cuts that marked them as clearly as a uniform. The constant handling of rough leather, splintered wood, and metal edges meant your hands became tough as boot leather within a few months. If you survived that long without a serious infection. That little cut on your thumb from yesterday? It's red and inflamed now, throbbing with every heartbeat. You'll ignore it because everyone ignores minor wounds until they can't anymore, and medieval medicine's solution to infected cuts is basically pray about it, or, if you're lucky, apply some moldy bread and hope it's the right kind of mold. The sergeant is still bellowing. You grab your belt, a serious piece of leather engineering that holds your sword, your eating knife, a small pouch with whatever personal items you own, a comb made from bone, maybe a small religious token, definitely not money because you haven't been paid in 6 weeks, and a drinking horn because hydration is important even in 1320. The sword is a cheap, mass-produced weapon that wobbles slightly in its scabbard. It's not the gleaming Excalibur of legend. It's a functional piece of sharpened metal that's been used by countless guards before you and will be used by countless guards after you're gone, either through promotion, dismissal, or one of the many creative ways medieval life finds to kill you. You stumble toward the muster point, which is a courtyard that's currently colder than a witch's heart. If witches were real, which your sergeant definitely thinks they are because he blessed himself when a black cat crossed the bailey yesterday. 15 other guards are assembling in something approximating a line, all of you looking like extras from a zombie movie. Nobody is perky. Nobody is alert. You're all operating on minimal sleep, questionable nutrition, and the grim determination of people who know that not showing up means not eating, and possibly also means some creative medieval punishment like being locked in the stocks where the village children will throw actual garbage at your head. The sergeant begins his morning inspection, which is less about military readiness and more about finding excuses to yell at people because that's apparently what passes for leadership training in the 14th century. He stops in front of the guy next to you, a young man who made the catastrophic mistake of being hung over at muster. The sergeant leans in close, takes one whiff, and unleashes a stream of invective so creative and profane that it would make a modern drill instructor weep with admiration. The punishment? The hungover guard gets the worst watch position of the day. The North Tower, which is exposed to wind from 3 directions and hasn't had its shutters repaired since Edward II was king, and Edward II has been very dead for a while now. Your turn. The sergeant looks you up and down with the enthusiasm of someone examining a particularly disappointing turnip. He notices your damp gambeson and asks if you think you're too fancy to dry your equipment properly. You don't mention that there's nowhere to dry anything properly because the guardroom has the ventilation of a sealed tomb and it's been raining for 6 consecutive days, which is just normal English weather. You mumble an apology. He moves on. You've passed inspection, which means you're adequately armed and not visibly drunk, and honestly, that's the bar. Now comes the shift assignment, and this is where you discover whether you're going to have a merely miserable day or a catastrophically miserable day. There are several guard positions around a castle, each with its own special flavor of suffering. The gatehouse is prestigious but exhausting because it's the highest traffic area, and you'll spend your entire shift checking passes, arguing with merchants, and trying to stop the local drunk from visiting his friend who definitely doesn't work here. The wall walks are exposed to weather, but at least you're moving, which helps with circulation when your feet have gone numb from cold. The towers are sheltered but mind-numbingly boring because you're just standing in one spot for hours, watching absolutely nothing happen while your brain slowly turns to porridge from understimulation. You get assigned to the East Wall Walk, which is fine. Not great, not terrible. It's the medieval equivalent of a middle management position. You'll be patrolling a section of wall about 200 feet long, back and forth, for the next 6 hours before your break. Then another 6 hours after that. Your patrol partner is a guy named Edmund who has 2 topics of conversation: his bunions and his theory that the kitchen master is secretly watering down the ale, which might actually be true but also isn't something either of you can do anything about because you're guards, which is basically the medieval version of being furniture that occasionally has to hit people. The sergeant dismisses you all with a final warning that anyone caught sleeping on duty will be docked a week's pay, which is especially threatening given that you still haven't been paid for last month. You and Edmund trudge toward your post, climbing the stone stairs that spiral up into the East Tower. These stairs are worn smooth in the middle from centuries of feet, which makes them treacherous when wet, and they're always wet because the tower leaks. Someone before you has tried to improve traction by scattering sand on the steps, but this just creates a slippery paste that's somehow worse than the original problem. You emerge onto the wall walk just as the sky is starting to lighten from black to a deep blue-gray. The castle is beginning to wake up around you. Smoke rises from the kitchen building as the cooks start preparing the day's meals. Somewhere below, you can hear chickens making their loud, stupid chicken noises, protesting their existence or celebrating the dawn or doing whatever it is that goes on in chicken brains. A dog barks. Another dog answers. This triggers a cascade of barking from every dog in the castle, which is approximately 12 dogs because medieval people loved dogs and nobody had invented leash laws yet. The wall walk itself is about 6 feet wide, with a crenellated parapet on the outer edge, those iconic castle battlements with alternating high and low sections. The high sections are called merlins and they provide cover if someone's shooting arrows at you. The low sections are called embrasures or crenels, and they're where you'd shoot back from, assuming you have any ranged weapon training, which you don't because you're a guard, not an archer, and medieval military organizations are very specific about role specialization. Edmund takes a position and you take yours about 50 feet apart, and you begin your patrol. Walk to your partner. Exchange a few words. Still dark. Yep. Turn around, walk back to your end point. Turn around, walk back to your partner. Repeat, repeat, repeat. You'll do this roughly 400 times over the course of your 12-hour shift, which is approximately 5 miles of walking on a 6-foot wide stone pathway with a deadly drop on either side. And it's still not fully light out. Your shift has been going for maybe 30 minutes. You have 11 and a half hours to go. The cold is already seeping through your layers. That damp gambeson is doing you no favors, and chainmail is an excellent conductor of cold, which means it's basically turning you into a refrigerated meat display. Your fingers are getting stiff, which is bad because you need finger dexterity to operate weapons, but it's not like you can wear gloves because medieval glove technology for combat is basically non-existent at your pay grade. Rich knights get articulated plate gauntlets. You get chilblains and the hope that you won't develop frostbite before spring arrives. Your stomach growls, reminding you that you haven't eaten since yesterday evening, and breakfast won't be for another 2 hours. The morning meal will be bread, not good bread, but the dense, dark stuff made from whatever grain was cheapest, possibly some cheese if you're lucky, and ale because the water is questionable and everyone knows ale is safer, which it actually is because the brewing process kills most of the harmful bacteria, though nobody understands the mechanism, they just know that people who drink water get sick more often. Edmund is already complaining about his feet. It's been 45 minutes. You look out over the embrasure at the landscape beyond the castle walls. The sun is starting to break through now, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that would be beautiful if you weren't so cold and tired and already dreading the next 11 hours. The countryside stretches out in a patchwork of fields and forests, little villages here and there sending up their own columns of smoke. It's peaceful, almost serene, and you'd trade all the scenic beauty for a warm bed and another 3 hours of sleep in a heartbeat. But you're a medieval castle guard, and this is your life now. Day after day, shift after shift, walking back and forth on a stone wall, protecting people who barely acknowledge your existence, for wages that barely keep you fed, in conditions that would violate every workplace safety regulation humans will invent over the next 7 centuries. Welcome to guard duty. You're going to hate every minute of it. The sun is fully up now, which means you can finally see all the ways your equipment is trying to kill you. That chainmail you struggled into an hour ago? It's not just heavy and cold. It's actively hostile to human comfort in ways that seem almost deliberate. Every ring is a potential pinch point. Every seam a place where metal can catch on fabric or skin, and the whole apparatus shifts and settles as you move. redistributing its weight in ways that create new pressure points every 20 minutes. Let's talk about what you're actually wearing, because Hollywood has lied to you extensively. Your chainmail hauberk, that's the fancy term for a chainmail shirt, is constructed from thousands of tiny interlocking iron rings, each one about the diameter of a pencil eraser. Some of these rings are welded closed, some are just butted together. And the difference matters because the butted rings occasionally pop open under stress, leaving gaps in your protection that you won't discover until something sharp finds them. The entire garment weighs somewhere between 30 and 40 pounds, which doesn't sound like much until you realize you're carrying it on your shoulders and torso for 12 consecutive hours. The weight distribution is absolutely brutal. Modern soldiers have load-bearing equipment designed by engineers who understand biomechanics and stress points. You have a metal shirt that hangs from your shoulders and neck like the world's worst fashion choice. Within the first hour, you'll develop a deep ache across your trapezius muscles, those big muscles that run from your neck to your shoulders. By hour 3, it'll feel like someone's driving railroad spikes into your upper back. By hour 6, you'll have lost most of the feeling in your shoulders and you'll just exist in a state of generalized misery that's become your new baseline for normal. And here's a fun detail that nobody mentions. Chainmail is loud. Every movement produces this distinctive metallic rustling, like someone crumpling tin foil next to a microphone. Walking sounds like a one-man percussion section. Turning your head creates a cascade of tiny metallic clicks. Trying to be stealthy in chainmail is like trying to sneak around while wearing a wind chime suit. This becomes especially delightful during night shifts when you're supposed to be alert for intruders, but everything you do announces your presence to anyone within 50 feet. Under the chainmail, your gambeson is developing personality. And by personality, I mean smells. The padded jacket is made from multiple layers of linen or wool, stitched together in a quilted pattern and stuffed with whatever padding material was available. Usually more linen or wool scraps, sometimes old rope fibers, occasionally straw if whoever made it was really cutting corners. This creates a garment that's thick, warm, and absolutely incapable of breathing. You're essentially wrapped in a medieval sleeping bag that you can't take off. The sweat starts immediately. Even in the cold morning air, the combination of physical exertion, remember, you're walking miles in heavy armor, and zero ventilation means you're producing moisture at an impressive rate. This moisture has nowhere to go, so it just saturates the gambeson, which then saturates your undertunic, which then saturates your skin. By midday, you'll be marinating in your own personal humidity chamber, and by evening, you'll smell like something died inside your armor, which is not far from the truth because you definitely killed some skin cells and probably some dignity. Historians still argue whether medieval people changed their gambesons regularly or just wore the same one until it literally fell apart. But the practical evidence suggests most guards were in the latter category. Washing a gambeson is an all-day affair involving hauling water, scrubbing, and then waiting several days for the thing to dry, during which time you either go without protection or borrow someone else's equally disgusting backup. Most guards just didn't. They'd air it out occasionally, maybe hang it in the wind, definitely pray about it, but actual washing? That's a special occasion activity, like twice a year whether it needs it or not. Your boots are their own adventure in suffering. Medieval footwear for common guards wasn't the sleek leather riding boots you see in movies. Those were for nobility who could afford custom cobbling. You're wearing turn shoes, which are leather boots constructed inside out, then turned right side out after stitching, creating a smooth interior but putting all the seams on the outside where they can absorb water like enthusiastic sponges. The leather is thick but not waterproof, and waterproofing technology basically amounts to rubbing animal fat into the leather and hoping for the best. The soles are single-layer leather, maybe a quarter-inch thick, which means you feel every pebble, every crack in the stone, every inconsistency in the surface you're walking on. There's no arch support because the concept of arch support won't be invented until the 20th century. There's no padding because padding is for people who matter. There's just your foot, a thin layer of leather, and the unforgiving stone of the castle walls. Your feet will hurt in ways you didn't know feet could hurt, developing blisters on top of calluses on top of older blisters that never healed properly. And they leak. Oh, do they leak? The first puddle you step in, and you will step in puddles because the wall walk has no drainage system and collects every drop of rain and morning dew, your feet become instantly catastrophically wet. The water seeps in through the seams, through the leather itself, and suddenly you're experiencing the unique medieval joy of wet wool socks, which are somehow more miserable than being barefoot. Wet wool doesn't just feel cold. It feels actively hostile, clinging to your skin with a clammy determination that makes you question every life choice that led you to this moment. Edmund has noticed you limping slightly and offers some veteran advice. Gets better after the first year. Feet toughen up. This is meant to be encouraging, but mostly serves to remind you that you've signed up for potentially years of this experience, assuming you survive that long. The mortality rate for castle guards wasn't particularly high from combat. Most castles went decades without seeing actual military action, but it was impressive from infections, accidents, and what medieval people called ague, but we'd recognize as just being cold and wet until your body gave up. Your belt is digging into your hip. This is because medieval belts were serious business, thick leather straps, sometimes an inch and a half wide, because they had to support significant weight. Your sword hangs on the left side, probably 3 pounds of badly balanced metal. Your eating knife is on your right, another pound. The small pouch with your personal items adds a few more ounces. All of this creates pressure points that shift as you move, and by afternoon, you'll have a deep red welt across your waist that'll take days to fade, just in time for your next shift to create a new one. The sword itself deserves special mention as an instrument of annoyance. In movies, warriors wear swords and they just sort of hang there elegantly, maybe bouncing slightly when the hero runs. Your sword is more like having an angry, suicidal metal dog on a leash. It swings when you walk, banging against your leg with every step. Catches on door frames, on other people, on parts of your own clothing. The scabbard, which is just leather wrapped around wood, has started to split at the bottom because someone before you stored the sword away wet and the moisture rotted the stitching. This means the sword blade occasionally pokes through, which you discover when it stabs you in the calf through your boot. You're not even trained to use this sword properly. Oh sure, you've had some basic instruction. Hold the pointy end toward the enemy, try not to cut off your own limbs, but actual swordsmanship is a sophisticated art that takes years to master, and you've been a guard for 4 months. Your job isn't to duel dramatically on staircases. It's to look armed and moderately threatening, which hopefully discourages the kinds of problems that would require you to actually use the weapon. Most of what you do with the sword is carry it, which is its own special form of exercise that leaves your shoulder constantly sore from the uneven weight distribution. The chainmail is starting to chafe in earnest now. There's a spot on your right shoulder where a ring has been catching on your gambeson with every movement, and the friction has worn through to your undertunic, and now it's working on your actual skin. You can feel it, a little burning sensation that flares with every step. By the end of your shift, it'll be a raw patch the size of a coin, and it'll hurt to lie down on that side, which means you won't sleep well, which means tomorrow you'll be even more exhausted, which is just how medieval life works. A cascade of small miseries that compound into one big misery. Edmund has started his lecture about proper armor maintenance, which you've heard before, but he's going to tell you again because there's literally nothing else to do. You got to oil the rings, he's saying, as if you have access to sufficient quantities of oil for regular armor maintenance when the castle is rationing lamp oil. Rust is the enemy, see. Gets into the links, weakens them. Next thing you know, someone pokes you and the whole section gives way. He's not wrong, but he's also describing a maintenance routine that requires time, resources, and energy that you simply don't have. Your chainmail is rusty. Everyone's chainmail is rusty. The armory is full of rusty equipment because the alternative, keeping thousands of metal rings properly maintained, would require a full-time staff and a budget that no lord is willing to allocate to common guards. So you do your best, maybe rub some fat into the problem areas when you can find fat. Mostly just accept that your armor is slowly deteriorating and hope it lasts longer than your contract. The helmet situation is even worse, and you're grateful you don't have to wear one during normal guard duty. Helmets are reserved for actual combat situations or ceremonial occasions when the Lord wants his guards looking impressive. This is fortunate because medieval helmets are essentially metal buckets that trap heat, muffle sound, and restrict vision, turning combat into a sweaty, disorienting nightmare. You've tried one on during training, a simple bowl-shaped affair called a kettle hat, and within 5 minutes you were drenched in sweat and couldn't hear Edmund yelling at you from 3 feet away. But let's get back to the immediate problem. You're 2 hours into your shift and your body is already filing formal complaints. Your shoulders hurt from the chainmail. Your feet hurt from the boots. Your hip hurts from the belt. Your back hurts from standing and walking on stone. You're developing a headache because you're dehydrated. You've been sweating into your gambeson, but you're trying to ration your water because the well is 3 towers away, and leaving your post to refill your drinking horn requires finding someone to cover for you, which requires negotiation and probably owing someone a favor. The sun is higher now, which means it's getting warmer, which means the inside of your armor is transitioning from cold and damp to warm and damp, which is somehow worse. You're generating this microclimate of humid misery between your body and your clothes, and there's nothing you can do about it except endure. This is why medieval people had such interesting relationships with saints. When your daily existence is this uncomfortable, prayer becomes less about abstract spirituality and more about desperately negotiating with any higher power that might make things slightly less awful. Your hands are cramping from gripping your spear. Oh right, the spear. Did I mention you're also carrying a spear? Because of course you are. Swords are for close combat and looking official. Spears are the actual working weapon of medieval warfare. Yours is about 7 feet long, wooden shaft with a metal point, and you've been holding it more or less upright for 2 hours because you're supposed to look alert and professional. Your forearms are burning. Your grip keeps slipping because your palms are sweaty inside your non-existent gloves. You lean the spear against the parapet for a moment of relief, knowing that if the sergeant makes a surprise inspection right now, you'll get written up for improper equipment handling. But your muscles are screaming and the sergeant is probably in the guardhouse drinking the good ale that never makes it to common guards, so you take the risk. 30 seconds of letting your arms rest. It's the small rebellions that keep you sane. Edmund has moved on to complaining about the quality of the chainmail repair work. Apparently, someone in the armory has been using iron wire that's too soft, and the repaired sections keep breaking under stress. He shows you his hauberk, pointing out 3 spots where rings have been replaced, and sure enough, 2 of them already look wonky. Happens all the time, he says with the weary acceptance of someone who's realized that incompetence is universal and eternal. They get paid by the piece, so they rush the work. Quality doesn't matter when you're trying to fix 50 hauberks in a week. This is actually fascinating from a historical perspective. Medieval people absolutely understood the concept of shoddy workmanship driven by economic incentives. They had quality control problems, supply chain issues, and budget constraints just like any modern organization. The difference is that when your supply chain fails in the modern world, you might not get your package on time. When it fails in the medieval world, your armor comes apart in the middle of a fight and you die. The stakes were somewhat higher. Your stomach is growling aggressively now, making noises that sound like 2 cats fighting in a burlap sack. Breakfast can't come soon enough, but you've still got another hour before the first meal break. You try to distract yourself by focusing on your duties, which is challenging because your duties are stand here and watch nothing happen. This is the paradox of guard work. You need to stay alert for threats, but threats are rare, which means mostly you're staying alert for the crushing boredom that makes you want to stop being alert, which could cause you to miss the rare threat, which is why you need to stay alert in the first place. It's a psychological torture device disguised as a job. The chainmail shifts again as you turn to walk back toward your endpoint. New pressure point right between your shoulder blades. It'll hurt for the next 10 minutes, then your nerves will give up reporting it because they have more urgent complaints from other areas. Then the weight will shift again and it'll start hurting somewhere else. This is your life now. A rotating schedule of localized pain as 35 pounds of metal slowly crushes your will to live. But hey, at least you're armed and armored. At least you have equipment. Some castles, especially in poorer regions, had guards who were barely better equipped than peasants. You could be carrying a rusty pike and wearing nothing but a leather jerkin and hope. This is what passes for counting your blessings in medieval times. Being grateful that your suffering is merely extensive rather than absolute. Edmund has finally stopped talking, which means he's either saving his energy or thinking about his bunions again. You walk your patrol, one foot in front of the other, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, feeling every ring of your armor, every creak of your boots, every protest from your exhausted body. And you've still got 10 hours left on your shift. You've been on duty for 3 hours now, and your body is sending you an urgent message. It needs to pee. This seems like a simple problem with a simple solution, except you're on a medieval castle wall, you can't leave your post without permission, and the nearest acceptable toilet facility is approximately 200 yards away through 3 doorways, down 2 flights of stairs, across a courtyard, and into a small stone building that may or may not currently be occupied. Welcome to one of the most under-discussed aspects of medieval guard duty, the logistical nightmare of basic human biology. Let's talk about medieval toilets, or as they were more commonly called, garderobes. The term literally means guard robe, because these toilet chambers were often built into the thickness of castle walls near wardrobes, under the theory that the ammonia from urine would help preserve clothing by deterring moths. This is simultaneously clever and absolutely disgusting, which pretty much sums up medieval problem solving. A garderobe is essentially a small chamber with a stone seat that has a hole in it, and that hole drops straight down through the castle wall to either a cesspit below, a moat if you're lucky, or just the outside ground if your castle's architect was having a bad day. The nearest garderobe to your position is in the tower you started from this morning, which means you need to abandon your patrol, walk back, descend into the tower, and hope the garderobe isn't already occupied by someone else experiencing the same biological imperatives. There's no queue system, no little occupied/vacant lock like on an airplane bathroom. You just walk up to the door and hope you don't hear someone already in there, grunting with the distinctive sounds of medieval digestion doing its worst. But here's the problem. You can't just leave. Guard duty rules are strict about this because the entire point of having guards is that they're guarding things, which requires them to actually be at their posts. You need to catch Edmund during one of his passes, explain the situation, and ask him to cover your section in addition to his own while you handle business. This negotiation has to be handled delicately because Edmund is already tired, already suffering, and asking him to walk extra distance isn't going to make him happy. Need a break. You tell him during his next pass, trying to sound casual rather than desperate. Edmund looks at you with the weary understanding of someone who's been exactly where you are. Garderobe or just water? Garderobe. He sighs, which is fair because this means he'll be walking double duty for however long you're gone. Make it quick. Sergeant's been doing surprise inspections lately. This is actually critical information. If the sergeant shows up and finds your position unmanned, even for 5 minutes, you're both in trouble, you for abandoning your post and Edmund for not reporting it. The punishment could range from lost pay to extra duty shifts to more creative medieval disciplinary actions like being locked in the pillory for a few hours while people throw vegetables at your head. Medieval management techniques were less about positive reinforcement and more about making everyone too terrified to step out of line. You hand your spear to Edmund. Now he's carrying 2 spears, which is awkward but necessary, and you speedwalk toward the tower entrance. Speedwalking in chainmail is its own special challenge because the metal doesn't move with your body. It lags slightly behind every motion, creating this weird rhythmic swinging that throws off your balance. You sound like a one-man metalworks factory as you rush along the wall walk, trying to move quickly while not actually running, because running in armor on a narrow elevated pathway is how people end up falling off castles and becoming cautionary tales. The tower entrance is a low doorway. Medieval architects apparently believed that tall people were a myth, and you have to duck to get through. Your chainmail scrapes against the stone doorframe with a sound that makes your teeth hurt. Inside, the tower is dim and smells like stone and damp and something organic that's probably mold. The spiral staircase going down is treacherous, as always, worn smooth in the center, and you take it carefully because falling downstairs in armor is both humiliating and potentially lethal. You reach the level where the garderobe is located, third floor of the tower, tucked into a small alcove that barely qualifies as a room. The door is closed, which could mean occupied or could mean the last person was polite enough to close it behind them. You listen carefully. Silence. Could be empty, could be someone trying to be discreet. You knock lightly. No response. You try the door, just a simple wooden door with a leather strap for a handle, and it opens. Success. The garderobe is unoccupied, which means you're not going to have to wait or, worse, try to find an alternative location. The garderobe itself is about as luxurious as you'd expect for a toilet that's essentially a hole in the wall. The chamber is maybe 4 feet square, with a stone bench built into one wall. The bench has a circular opening about 10 inches in diameter, smoothed from years of use. There's no lid, no seat, just a hole that drops into darkness below. The smell is present. Not overwhelming because the draft through the shaft actually provides some ventilation. Medieval architects understood airflow better than you'd think, but definitely noticeable. It's the smell of human waste mixed with lime, which gets thrown down the shaft periodically to help break things down and control odor. Now comes the complicated part. You have to use this facility while wearing 35 pounds of chainmail. You can't just sit down because the chainmail extends down to your mid-thigh, and sitting would mean sitting on metal rings, which is uncomfortable and potentially damaging to the armor. The solution is awkward but necessary. You have to gather up the front and back of your chainmail hauberk, essentially bunching it up around your waist like the world's most uncomfortable skirt. Then carefully position yourself over the hole while making sure nothing metal drops into the shaft, because retrieving items from a cesspit is not a job that exists in any formal capacity, which means it would become your job. Your gambeson is also problematic. It's long, it's bulky, and it's still damp from this morning's humidity, which means it's heavy and wants to hang down exactly where you don't want it hanging. You end up holding chainmail with one hand, gambeson with the other, and hoping your balance is good enough to maintain this position while your leg muscles, already sore from hours of patrol, start trembling from the strain. Medieval people were not shy about bodily functions. They couldn't afford to be when everyone lived in such close proximity and privacy was basically a fantasy. But this doesn't make the experience less undignified. You're crouched over a hole in a stone wall, holding up several layers of medieval clothing and armor, trying to conduct your business efficiently while knowing that Edmund is covering for you, and every minute you're gone increases the chance that the sergeant will show up and ruin everyone's day. The physics of this situation are also not in your favor. The hole opens directly to a shaft that drops straight down, which means there's a constant updraft of cool air mixed with essence of cesspit. This draft makes the whole experience more refreshing than it has any right to be, but also means you're very aware of just how far down that shaft goes and what's waiting at the bottom. Some castles had cesspits that were cleaned out regularly by gong farmers, actual professional cesspit cleaners who had one of the worst jobs in human history but were paid surprisingly well for it. Other castles just had shafts that emptied into moats or rivers, which tells you a lot about medieval water quality and why everyone drank ale. There's a small alcove in the garderobe wall with some moss and leaves, which serves as medieval toilet paper. This is actually a luxury. Some castles just expected you to use your hand and then rinse it in a water bucket, which is exactly as hygienic as it sounds. The moss is surprisingly effective, though calling anything about this process pleasant would be generous. Historians still argue whether medieval people understood the connection between sanitation and disease. but practical evidence suggests they knew enough to prefer moss over bare hands, even if they didn't understand the mechanism. You finish as quickly as possible and begin the complicated process of reassembling your layers. Undertunic straightened, gambeson pulled back down, chainmail redistributed evenly over your body, or as evenly as it ever sits, which is to say not very. You can feel new pressure points forming where the metal has shifted, new areas that are going to hurt in new ways for the next several hours. This is your life now. A constant rotation of discomfort as your equipment slowly crushes you from multiple angles. Before you leave, you notice there's a small shelf with a water jug and a basin for washing hands. The water is murky and has been sitting here for who knows how long, possibly days, possibly weeks. You splash some on your hands anyway because even medieval guards understood that some gestures toward cleanliness were better than none, even if the execution was questionable. The water is cold and smells faintly of metal from sitting in a copper basin. You dry your hands on your gambeson because there are no towels, and honestly your gambeson is already so filthy that a little more moisture isn't going to make a difference. The whole expedition has taken maybe 7 minutes, which feels like an hour when you know someone is covering for you. You hurry back up the spiral stairs, your legs protesting every step because they're already exhausted from 3 hours of patrol, and now they're being asked to haul 35 pounds of you plus armor up stone steps. Your breathing is heavy by the time you reach the top, and you emerge onto the wall walk with a gasp of fresh air that's extremely welcome after the close confines of the garderobe. Edmund sees you coming and looks relieved. "Thought you'd fallen in," he says, which is meant to be a joke but is actually a legitimate medieval concern. People did occasionally fall into cesspits, usually while drunk, and it was as fatal as it was humiliating because cesspit gases could knock you unconscious and then you'd drown in sewage, which is possibly the worst way to die in an era full of terrible ways to die. You reclaim your spear and Edmund heads off to take his own break, which means now you're covering double duty, walking between your position and his, trying to keep an eye on both sections of wall. This is exhausting, but it's the social contract of guard duty. You cover for your partners because eventually you'll need them to cover for you, whether for bathroom breaks, water refills, or those moments when you're about to fall asleep standing up and need someone to slap you awake before the sergeant notices. The whole experience has reminded you of an uncomfortable truth. You're going to need to do this again in about 4 hours. The human body processes fluids on a fairly regular schedule, and you've been drinking water and ale to stay hydrated, which means your kidneys are producing output that will need managing. You're going to spend your entire shift in this cycle. Drink fluids to stay functional, patrol until your bladder demands attention, negotiate coverage, rush to the garderobe, conduct undignified business while wearing armor, rush back, resume patrol. Repeat every 4 to 6 hours for the rest of your career. And we haven't even discussed the more serious biological needs. What happens when you need to actually use the garderobe for its primary purpose, which takes considerably longer than a quick bathroom break? What happens when you're sick? And medieval guards were frequently sick because the combination of poor nutrition, constant stress, inadequate sleep, and exposure to weather meant everyone was always fighting off something. And your digestive system decides to stage a rebellion in the middle of a 12-hour shift. The answer is you suffer. You suffer and hope your patrol partner is understanding and the sergeant doesn't show up and your body cooperates enough to let you handle things during your designated break time rather than in the middle of your shift. You learn to eat carefully, avoiding foods that might upset your stomach. You learn to ration your water intake, balancing hydration against the inconvenience of frequent bathroom trips. You learn to read your body signals and plan your breaks accordingly. Some guards, you've heard, just pee off the wall when they're desperate and the sergeant isn't around. This is officially forbidden for obvious reasons. Castles are supposed to be dignified structures, not open-air urinals, but practically speaking, when you're on the night shift and it's freezing cold and the garderobe is far away and you really need to go, sometimes you make pragmatic decisions. The castle cats probably don't appreciate it, and anyone walking below definitely doesn't. But this is medieval life where dignity is a luxury that common guards cannot afford. Edmund returns from his break looking marginally refreshed, which is to say slightly less miserable than he was before. Garderobe's backing up again, he mentions casually. Might want to mention it to someone. This is another delightful aspect of castle life, the maintenance issues. Garderobes periodically get clogged or overfull, requiring someone to address the problem, and that someone is usually one of the lowest-ranking castle workers who has committed some offense that needs punishing. The phrase "shit job" is not just figurative in medieval contexts. It's a literal description of tasks that need doing but that nobody wants to do, so they get assigned to whoever has the least power to refuse. You file this information away as something you definitely won't be volunteering to fix, and you resume your patrol. Your bladder is now empty, which is a relief, but your feet hurt more because you had to walk extra stairs, and your shoulders hurt more because you had to rush while wearing armor, and you're sweating more because exertion in a gambeson is like exercising in a sleeping bag. On balance, you're probably not any better off than you were before the bathroom break, but at least you're a different kind of uncomfortable now, which provides some variety to your suffering. The sun continues its arc across the sky. Your stomach is still growling because breakfast was an hour ago, but you ate it so fast, trying to maximize your break time, that you barely tasted it. You're already thinking about lunch, which is still hours away. Time moves differently when you're bored and in pain. Minutes stretch into hours, hours feel like days, and your 12-hour shift begins to feel like a geological epoch. But at least your bladder is empty for the next few hours. In the grand calculation of medieval miseries, you'll take the small victories wherever you can find them. You're 4 hours into your shift and the wind is picking up, which transforms the wall walk from merely uncomfortable to actively dangerous. Medieval castle walls weren't designed with safety railings or any of those modern conveniences that acknowledge human fragility. The parapet on the outer edge is about 4 feet high, just tall enough to provide cover from arrows if you crouch, but definitely not tall enough to prevent an adult from toppling over if they lose their balance. The inner edge of the wall walk? That's just open air leading to a 40-foot drop into the Bailey courtyard, where the landing options include cobblestones, a wagon full of manure if you're lucky, or the blacksmith's anvil if you're catastrophically unlucky. The wall walk itself is about 6 feet wide at this section, which sounds generous until you factor in that you're wearing bulky armor, carrying a 7-foot spear, and trying to maintain your balance on stones that are slick with morning dew and possibly moss, because medieval castle maintenance was more of a suggestion than a requirement. Some of these stones have been here for 200 years, and they've developed personalities. That one over there tilts slightly to the left. This one is smooth and treacherous when wet. That section has a crack running through it that's been slowly widening for a decade, and eventually someone's going to step wrong and the whole stone is going to shift. But today is apparently not that day because you're still alive. The wind is coming from the east, which means it's hitting you sideways as you walk your patrol, and wind does interesting things to chainmail. Remember how I mentioned that your armor weighs 35 pounds? Wind treats that as a sail. Every gust catches the bottom edge of your hauberk and pushes it, which pushes you, which means you're constantly making tiny balance corrections to stay upright and centered on the wall walk. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to explain. You're not doing anything dramatic, just maintaining your position, but it requires constant micro-adjustments that add up to serious muscle fatigue over hours. Edmund is having his own battle with physics. You watch him during one of your passes, and he's leaning into the wind at an angle that would look ridiculous in calm conditions but is absolutely necessary now. A particularly strong gust hits him and he staggers 2 steps to the side, toward the inner edge, toward that 40-foot drop, and catches himself with his spear, using it like a walking stick to regain balance. Your heart does something unpleasant in your chest because you just watched your patrol partner nearly become a red smear in the courtyard below. Getting rough, Edmund says with magnificent understatement when you reach him. His face is red from wind exposure and possibly terror. Lost a guard to this wall last winter. Wind caught him during a storm, right over the side. This is exactly the kind of cheerful information you need while trying not to think about the drop. Medieval people had a complicated relationship with height. They built these massive structures reaching toward the sky, But they also had no safety equipment, no understanding of fall protection, no workers' compensation for the families of people who died in construction or maintenance accidents. They just accepted that building and working on tall structures meant some people were going to fall, and that was part of the cost of having impressive castles. The parapet stones are weathered and uneven, which means you can't just lean against them for support without careful inspection first. Some of these stones are solid. Others have been weakened by decades of freeze-thaw cycles. Water gets into tiny cracks, freezes, expands, and slowly breaks the stone apart. It's a process that happens so gradually that it's invisible day to day, but over years it turns solid battlements into crumbly death traps. You've learned to test each stone before putting your weight on it, giving it a little shake to see if it moves. If it moves, you don't trust it. If it doesn't move, you still don't entirely trust it because medieval masonry quality was variable at best. The crenellations, those alternating high and low sections of the parapet, create wind tunnels. Air accelerates through the embrasures, the low sections, and then swirls chaotically when it hits the merlins, the high sections. This means the wind isn't just strong. It's unpredictable. You'll be walking in relative calm. Then suddenly a gust comes roaring through an embrasure and hits you like a physical blow. Your chainmail swings, your balance shifts, and you have a brief moment of pure adrenaline as you fight to stay upright and centered. The spear is actively trying to kill you now. 7 feet of wooden shaft with a metal point acts like a weather vane in wind, wanting to point wherever the air is moving. Holding it vertical requires constant grip adjustment and arm strength, but letting it swing freely means it might catch on something. A stone, a door frame, your patrol partner, with potentially catastrophic results. Some guards carry their spears horizontally when it's windy, but that's technically against regulations because you're supposed to maintain a ready defensive posture, which apparently means vertical spear even if the vertical spear is making your arms shake with fatigue. There's also the very real possibility of things falling on you from above. Castles are multi-level structures, and the wall walk is only one level. There are usually towers rising higher, and those towers have windows, murder holes, and sometimes just gaps where the masonry has deteriorated. Anything on a higher level can potentially fall to your level, loose stones dislodged by weather, tools dropped by maintenance workers, water from someone emptying a chamber pot, which yes, is a real thing that happens because medieval people had creative approaches to waste disposal that didn't always consider who might be below. The wind is also making you cold in new and exciting ways. Earlier, you were cold because of your damp gambeson. Now you're cold because wind cuts through chainmail like it's not even there. The metal conducts cold. The air flowing through the rings chills you further, and you're essentially wearing a refrigeration unit that happens to weigh 35 pounds. Your hands are getting numb despite it being mid-morning, and numb hands are dangerous hands because you need finger dexterity to grip your spear, to catch yourself if you stumble, to do basically anything that keeps you alive on a narrow, elevated pathway. Edmund has pulled his hood up, which is that attached fabric hood that's part of the chainmail coif, a separate piece of armor that covers your head and neck. You don't have one because you're still relatively new and equipment gets allocated based on seniority. Edmund's been a guard for 3 years, which is long enough to have earned slightly better gear. Your head and neck are just exposed, which means your ears are developing that painful burning sensation that happens when wind hits cold flesh for extended periods. By tonight, your ears will be bright red and tender to touch, and by tomorrow they'll be chapped and possibly cracking, which is how you develop those weathered, beaten-down features that mark veteran guards. The sound of wind through castle fortifications is its own special horror. It whistles through arrow slits, moans through murder holes, and creates these low resonant hums when it flows over certain stone configurations. Combined with the metallic rustling of your chainmail and the creaking of leather and the general ambient noise of a functioning castle, you're surrounded by this unsettling soundtrack that makes everything feel vaguely haunted. Medieval people were deeply superstitious, And honestly, you can understand why when you're standing on a wall at dawn and the wind is making noises that sound distinctly like voices or crying or whatever your imagination wants to interpret them as. You're approaching the corner tower now, where your section of wall makes a 90-degree turn. Corners are treacherous because the wind patterns change unpredictably. You might be sheltered one moment and then hit by crosswinds the next. The stones at corners also tend to be more worn because they get weather exposure from two directions. You slow down, test your footing more carefully, and make the turn while keeping your center of gravity low and toward the middle of the walk. Something falls past you. A piece of stone, maybe fist-sized, tumbling from somewhere above. You watch it drop, and it seems to fall forever before it hits the courtyard below with a distant crack. Nobody down there reacts, which means either they didn't notice or they're so used to stuff falling off the castle that it's not worth commenting on. This is your workplace safety standard. Things fall, people dodge, or they don't, life continues or it doesn't, and the castle keeps standing because stone is more durable than people. Historians still argue whether medieval people had a concept of workplace safety, but the evidence suggests they understood danger. They just didn't have the social or economic framework to do much about it. Lords needed castles defended, guards needed employment, and the implicit contract was, we'll pay you barely enough to survive, and in exchange you'll risk your life doing tedious tasks in dangerous conditions. Workers' rights movements were still several centuries away, so your options were essentially accept the conditions or starve, which isn't much of a choice. Your legs are burning from the constant balance adjustments. You're not just walking, you're fighting to stay stable with every step, and that engages muscle groups that aren't meant to work continuously for hours. Your calves are tight, your thighs are trembling, and your lower back is developing a deep ache from maintaining a slightly crouched defensive posture. Modern soldiers train for this kind of sustained physical stress. You got maybe 2 weeks of basic training before being assigned to duty, which consisted mostly of, here's how you hold a spear, try not to die, good luck. The wind gusts again and you hear a loud crack from somewhere on the wall. Could be a loose stone shifting. Could be a wooden shutter breaking. Could be nothing serious, or could be the first sign that a section of parapet is about to collapse and take whoever's nearby with it. You can't tell, and even if you could, what would you do? Report it to someone who might fix it eventually? Medieval maintenance schedules operated on the principle of fix it after it breaks completely, which meant everything was always in a state of barely functional decay. Edmund has stopped walking and is just standing at his position, leaning against a section of Merlin that he apparently trusts. You don't blame him. Walking takes energy and the wind is making every step an adventure in not dying. You could stop too, but that feels like giving up, and giving up means admitting that this job is defeating you, and you're not ready for that level of existential surrender yet. So you keep walking back and forth, fighting wind and fatigue and the growing certainty that this is what your life is going to be for the foreseeable future. Cold, tired, and one gust away from disaster. A bird, some kind of crow or raven, lands on the parapet about 20 feet ahead of you. It sits there, perfectly balanced despite the wind, looking at you with the kind of judgment that only corvids can manage. The bird is handling these conditions better than you are because it weighs 2 pounds and has hollow bones and is built for aerial navigation in challenging conditions. You weigh 160 pounds, are wearing 35 more pounds of medieval armor, and are built for sitting safely on the ground like a sensible creature. The bird takes off, riding a gust of wind with casual grace that makes your struggle look even more pathetic by comparison. You watch it soar away toward the forest beyond the castle, and you feel a sharp pang of envy for any creature that can just leave whenever it wants. You're stuck here for another 8 hours, then you'll sleep in a moldy guardroom, then you'll be back here tomorrow doing exactly the same thing. The bird has the entire sky. You have 6 feet of stone pathway and the privilege of not falling off it. The wind is stealing your body heat so efficiently that you're starting to shiver despite the physical exertion of patrolling. Shivering while trying to maintain balance is its own special challenge because your muscles are twitching involuntarily, making your movements jerky and unpredictable. You tighten your grip on your spear, plant your feet more carefully, and continue your patrol because stopping means standing still, and standing still means freezing faster, and freezing means your reactions slow down, and slow reactions on a windy wall are how guards become casualties. Edmund waves at you from his position. Not a friendly wave, a something's wrong wave. You hurry toward him, which is terrifying because hurrying means moving faster than is safe. But if Edmund is signaling, it's important. You reach him and he points down at his section of walkway. There's a crack in one of the stones, and it's visibly moving, flexing slightly with each gust of wind. The stone hasn't broken yet, but it's clearly compromised, and walking on it is going to be risky. Needs reporting, Edmund says, but the sergeant's going to ask why we didn't notice it earlier. This is classic medieval management. The problem existed before your shift, possibly for weeks or months, but discovering it becomes your responsibility and potentially your fault. You have to report it because ignoring structural damage to a castle wall is dereliction of duty, but reporting it means paperwork and questions and possible blame. There's no good option, just less bad options, which is basically the theme of your entire existence as a guard. You mark the location mentally, about 30 feet from the corner tower, inner side of the walk, and you'll mention it at the shift change. Until then, you'll just avoid stepping on that particular stone and hope it doesn't catastrophically fail before someone more important than you decides to do something about it. This is medieval quality control. Notice problems, report problems, pray problems don't kill anyone before they get fixed, except that some people will definitely die before fixes happen. The wind howls through the crenellations, your chainmail rattles, and you continue your patrol on a narrow stone path 40 feet above a courtyard full of things that would hurt tremendously to land on. You've been doing this for 4 hours. You have 8 more hours to go. And tomorrow you'll do it all again. You're 6 hours into your shift now, and you've discovered something that medieval philosophers probably debated in monasteries. Time can actually stop. Or at least, it can slow down so dramatically that each minute feels like it's wading through cold honey. You've been walking back and forth on this wall for so long that you've started counting steps between your position and Edmund's. 473 steps. You know because you've counted them approximately 40 times. You've also counted the stones in the parapet, 87 visible from your patrol route. You've counted the trees in the distant forest, gave up at 216 because they blur together. You've counted everything countable because your brain is desperately seeking stimulation in an environment that offers none. This is the paradox of guard duty that nobody warns you about. You need to stay vigilant and alert for threats, but threats are so statistically rare that your brain rebels against the constant state of readiness. Human minds aren't designed for this kind of sustained, unfocused attention. We're built for hunting, gathering, socializing, solving problems, activities with variety and feedback and accomplishment. Walking back and forth on a wall, watching for dangers that probably won't materialize, while experiencing progressive physical discomfort. That's psychological torture disguised as employment. Edmund has given up even pretending to patrol with any enthusiasm. He's found a spot where 2 Merlins create a wind shadow and he's just standing there, leaning against the stone, staring at nothing. You don't blame him. You're tempted to do the same, but some stubborn part of your personality, the part that hasn't been completely crushed by medieval working conditions, insists that you keep moving, keep looking alert, keep maintaining the fiction that this job has meaning and purpose. The boredom is physical. You can feel it in your body, a kind of restless, itchy sensation that makes you want to move differently, do something, anything that isn't walking this same 473-step route. Your muscles are twitching with unused energy despite being exhausted from carrying armor. Your mind is simultaneously foggy from lack of stimulation and hyperactive from desperate attempts to find something, anything, interesting to think about. You've started playing mental games to stay conscious. There's the what-if game, where you imagine elaborate scenarios that might require your intervention. What if a dragon attacked? Completely implausible, but at least it's entertaining to imagine how you'd respond to a flying, fire-breathing reptile with your 7-foot spear and complete lack of dragon-fighting training. What if assassins scaled the wall? Slightly more plausible, and you've actually worked out a defensive strategy involving shouting very loudly for help while backing away from danger. What if the castle was secretly built on an ancient burial ground and ghosts started appearing? This one's probably more likely than the dragon given medieval superstitions, and honestly at this point a ghost would at least be something different to look at. The Bailey courtyard below is providing minimal entertainment. You can see people going about their daily castle business. Servants hauling water, stable hands mucking out stalls, a blacksmith working at his forge producing rhythmic clanging sounds that echo off the stone walls. There's a small market area where vendors have set up stalls, selling vegetables, cloth, and questionable meat products to castle residents. A dog is chasing a chicken, which is briefly exciting until the chicken escapes and the dog loses interest. That's been the highlight of your last hour, 30 seconds of animal drama. You've also become intimately familiar with the castle's architectural details, not by choice but by sheer exposure. That tower to your left has a window on the 3rd floor that's slightly crooked, probably because the stones settled unevenly after construction. The parapet has 3 different shades of stone because it's been repaired multiple times over the decades, and whoever did the repairs used whatever stone was available rather than matching the original. There's a section of wall about 50 feet away where you can see the outline of an older window that was bricked up, probably when someone decided that defensive positions were more important than natural light. Historians still argue whether medieval people experienced boredom the same way modern people do, but you're here to testify that yes, absolutely, boredom is a universal human experience that transcends centuries. The only difference is that medieval people didn't have the vocabulary to complain about it as articulately, and they also didn't have alternatives. You can't pull out a phone and scroll through social media. You can't listen to music or podcasts. You can't even read a book because books are rare, expensive, and you probably can't read anyway because literacy rates for common guards are approximately 0%. Your entertainment options are think about things, look at things, or talk to Edmund when you cross paths, and Edmund's conversation topics have been exhausted. You know about his bunions, his theory about the watered ale, his dead brother who was also a guard, his opinion about the sergeant's mother unflattering, his views on the proper way to oil chainmail detailed, and his belief that the castle's baker is stealing bread probably accurate. You've shared your own limited life experiences, and now you've both run out of material. The silences between your meetings are growing longer because neither of you has anything new to say. The worst part is that you can't even fully zone out. You have to maintain some level of awareness because there's always the possibility, however remote, that something might actually happen. A messenger might arrive at the gate. A supply wagon might approach. The sergeant might appear for a surprise inspection. An attacker might attempt to scale the walls, which hasn't happened in living memory but theoretically could happen at any moment, which is why you're here in the first place. So you exist in this strange mental state, too bored to be fully present, too vigilant to fully disconnect. Your consciousness becomes diffuse, spread thin across hours of nothingness. You're simultaneously hyper-aware of your physical discomfort. Every ache, every chill, every pressure point where your armor digs into flesh, and completely numb to it because the discomfort has become your baseline reality. This is just what existence feels like now. This is normal. You've started having conversations with yourself, which is either a sign of healthy mental adaptation or the first stage of going quietly insane. You narrate your own actions. Now I'm walking toward the corner tower. Now I'm turning around. Now I'm walking back toward Edmund. Now I'm wondering why I made the life choices that led me to this moment. It provides a tiny amount of structure to the formless hours, a sense that something is happening even if that something is just you describing your own tedious existence to yourself. The sun has moved across the sky, which is the only reliable way to mark time's passage. It was low and to the east when your shift started. Now it's high and slightly to the west, which means it's past noon, which means you've survived half your shift. This should feel like progress, but instead it feels like you've been granted the privilege of doing this for another 6 hours. The glass isn't half full or half empty. It's half full of more misery. You've noticed that your standards for interesting have plummeted catastrophically. Earlier, you were bored by normal castle activities. Now you're finding entertainment in incredibly mundane details. There's a cloud formation that vaguely resembles a sheep. Fascinating. The wind changed direction slightly. Revolutionary. Edmund just adjusted his belt. Gripping drama. Your mental stimulation threshold has dropped so low that literally anything that isn't exactly what you were looking at 1 second ago counts as exciting new content. There's also a peculiar time distortion happening. Minutes feel like hours, but when you try to remember what happened 2 hours ago, it's just blank. Your memory isn't recording these experiences because nothing memorable is happening. You're creating hours of lived experience that will leave no lasting impression. No stories to tell, no growth or change or development. You're existing in a perpetual present tense that's simultaneously eternal and instantly forgotten. This must be what eternity feels like, you think. Not the glorious eternal life promised by the church, but something more like this: consciousness without change, existence without events, time without meaning. You're experiencing a preview of purgatory, except instead of waiting for divine judgment, you're waiting for your shift to end so you can sleep in a moldy guardroom and then do this again tomorrow. Edmund catches your eye during one of your passes and makes a gesture, pointing at the sun, then at the horizon, then holding up 4 fingers. For more hours until shift change. He's been tracking time the same way you have, probably going through the same mental deterioration, probably having similar thoughts about the nature of existence and whether this job is really worth the bread and ale they barely pay you with. You nod acknowledgement. What else is there to say? You're both trapped here, both serving out your sentence, both pretending this has purpose. You complete another circuit. 473 steps. Turn around. 473 steps back. Your feet hurt in ways that have evolved beyond pain into something more like a persistent screaming that your brain has learned to tune out. Your shoulders are numb from the chainmail, which is actually worse than pain because numbness means nerve compression, which means potential long-term damage, but long-term damage is a tomorrow problem and you're focused on surviving today. A bell rings somewhere in the castle, the chapel bell, marking the hour for afternoon prayers. Some of the people in the courtyard below pause in their work, cross themselves, maybe mouth a quick prayer before resuming their tasks. You don't bother because stopping your patrol for prayers means making up that time later. And also because God's attention seems to be focused elsewhere given your current circumstances. If divine providence was watching over guards on boring wall patrols, surely something interesting would have happened by now. The wind has died down, which should be a relief but is actually worse because now there's nothing. No weather to struggle against, no environmental challenge to occupy your attention, just still air and sunshine and the absolute absence of anything happening. At least when the wind was threatening to blow you off the wall, you had something to react to. Now you have nothing, and nothing is somehow more exhausting than something. You're so bored that you're becoming philosophical about boredom, which is probably a bad sign. You're thinking about the nature of time, the meaning of existence, the purpose of consciousness. These are questions that monks spend lifetimes contemplating in the comfort of monasteries with regular meals and libraries. You're contemplating them on a castle wall while wearing armor that's slowly crushing your spine, which seems unfair but also perfectly representative of your station in life. Edmund has started singing quietly. You can hear snatches of melody when you pass close enough. some folk song about a miller's daughter and a traveling merchant. It's off-key and he only knows about 3 verses, which he repeats in a loop. This should be annoying, but instead it's almost comforting because it's sound, it's variety. It's proof that humans exist and are capable of producing something besides the grinding monotony of shift work. You try singing too, but you only know religious hymns from chapel services, and they're all slow and somber and somehow make everything feel more depressing. You give up after 1 verse of something about mortality and divine judgment. Not helpful. You need entertainment, not existential dread. Although at this point the distinction is becoming blurry. 3 hours and 45 minutes until shift change. You know this because you've been calculating obsessively, breaking the remaining time into smaller chunks to make it seem more manageable. 1 hour is 4 trips to Edmond and back. 15 minutes is 1 trip. 3 hours and 45 minutes is 15 trips, which still sounds like an impossibly large number but is smaller than the rest of your shift. You've also started bargaining with yourself. If you can make it to the next hour, you'll allow yourself to sit down for 30 seconds. If you can make it to 2 hours, you'll take a long drink from your water skin even though rationing water is generally a good policy. These tiny rewards for continued existence are keeping you functional, barely. The courtyard dog has returned and is now sleeping in a patch of sunlight. You hate that dog with surprising intensity, not because it's done anything wrong, but because it represents everything you can't have. The dog can sleep whenever it wants. The dog doesn't wear armor. The dog's job is to exist and occasionally bark at strangers. The dog is living your dream life, and you're stuck up here on a wall, counting stones and fighting the overwhelming urge to just sit down and refuse to continue. But you don't sit down. You don't refuse to continue. You keep walking, keep patrolling, keep maintaining your vigilance for threats that won't materialize. Because this is your job and you need the money, and medieval economic systems don't offer many alternatives for people of your social class. You're a guard because you're not skilled enough to be a craftsman, not educated enough to be a clerk, not connected enough to be anything better, and not desperate enough to become a bandit, though some days like today, the bandit option seems increasingly reasonable. 473 steps. Turn around. 473 steps back. The sun continues its arc, time continues its crawl. You continue your patrol. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a small voice asks, is this really what life is supposed to be? Is this what you're defending? Is this worth it? You don't have good answers. You just have 4 more hours until shift change, and then you get to sleep, and then you get to do this all again. The boredom continues. The day continues. You continue. Barely. The sky has been darkening for the past hour, and now the first drops of rain begin to fall. Not the gentle, refreshing rain of a summer shower. This is aggressive English rain. The kind that comes at you sideways with personal vendetta. The kind that medieval people just called weather because it was so constant that distinguishing between types of precipitation seemed pointless. Within 30 seconds, you're wet. Within 2 minutes, you're soaked. Within 5 minutes, you've discovered that every medieval proverb about rain is absolutely true. And they're all variations on the theme of, this is miserable and there's nothing you can do about it. Your first instinct is to seek shelter, but here's the problem. You're a guard on a wall, and walls by their nature are exposed to weather. There is no shelter. The closest covered space is the tower entrance, but you can't just abandon your post because it's raining. Medieval warfare didn't pause for weather. Attackers could strike during storms just as easily as during sunshine, which means guards couldn't pause for weather either. You're expected to maintain your patrol regardless of what the sky decides to dump on you, because the castle needs defending and your comfort is somewhere around priority number 800 on the list of things that matter. The rain is cold, not freezing, but that penetrating damp cold that gets into your bones and makes you feel like you'll never be warm again. It's hitting your face, running down your neck, finding every gap in your clothing and exploiting it ruthlessly. Your chainmail, which has been a consistent source of misery all day, somehow becomes worse in rain. The metal doesn't absorb water, it just channels it, directing little rivers of cold rainwater directly onto your body at strategic points where maximum suffering can be achieved. Edmund looks like a drowned rat with armor. His hair is plastered to his head, water dripping from his nose, and he's developed this 1,000-yard stare that suggests he's retreated to some interior mental space where weather can't reach him. You exchange a look as you pass each other. No words, just mutual acknowledgement that this is happening and there's nothing either of you can do except endure it. Your Gambison is living its worst life right now. Remember how it was damp this morning from yesterday's humidity? It's now thoroughly soaked, absorbing rain like an aggressive sponge. Padded fabric doesn't handle water well under normal circumstances, but when you combine it with body heat and constant movement, it becomes a hostile environment that's somehow both cold and producing steam. The weight increases dramatically as water saturates the padding. You're probably carrying an extra 10 pounds of absorbed water on top of your armor's regular weight. The whole garment clings to your body in a clammy embrace that makes you want to tear it off. Except you can't because underneath is chainmail and underneath that is more wet fabric and it's wet all the way down. The leather components of your equipment are also having a crisis. Your belt, your sword scabbard, your boots. Leather handles rain poorly. It absorbs moisture, becomes heavy and stiff, and if it dries improperly later, it'll crack and become brittle. You're supposed to oil leather regularly to maintain it, but you don't have enough oil for regular maintenance because oil is expensive and you're poor, so your leather equipment is slowly deteriorating with every rainstorm. Your boots, which were already questionable, are now completely waterlogged, making squishing sounds with every step and providing zero protection from the cold water you're walking through. The wall walk has transformed into a shallow stream. The stones don't drain properly. Medieval engineering understood some things about water management, but implementation was inconsistent. So water pools in the low spots and runs in little rivers along the higher sections. The moss that was merely slippery when dry is now treacherous when wet. You have to walk more carefully, testing each step, because falling on a stone walkway 40 feet above the ground would be bad enough in dry conditions, but in rain becomes almost comically dangerous. Visibility is dropping. The rain creates a gray curtain that limits how far you can see, which would be a legitimate security concern if there was any chance of actual threats materializing in this weather. You're theoretically watching for enemies approaching the castle, but in practical terms, you can barely see the tree line through the rain, and anyone watching back would see a miserable guard-shaped figure trudging through a storm, hardly an intimidating defensive presence. The wind has returned, which combines with rain to create that special horizontal precipitation experience that Britain is famous for. The rain isn't falling down. It's flying sideways, driven by wind that's accelerated by the castle's architecture. The crenellations that were wind tunnels earlier are now rain tunnels, concentrating the precipitation and blasting it at you with focused intensity. There's no avoiding it, no angle of approach that provides relief. You're just wet from all directions simultaneously. Your hands are so cold they're starting to lose function. The rain is maybe 50 degrees, and it's constantly washing away any body heat you generate. Your fingers are white and stiff, and gripping your spear is becoming difficult because your muscles aren't responding properly. This is genuinely dangerous, not from enemy action but from simple thermoregulation failure. Medieval people understood that extreme cold could kill you, but they didn't have the scientific vocabulary for hypothermia. They just knew that being wet and cold for too long meant you might die, and the prevention was basically try not to be wet and cold, which isn't helpful when your job requires standing in the rain. Historians still argue whether medieval people had a concept of workplace safety regulations, but evidence strongly suggests they understood hazards. They just didn't have the social framework to do anything about them. You can't refuse to work because it's raining. You can't demand protective equipment because protective equipment doesn't exist in any meaningful form. Your options are to continue patrolling in the rain or to abandon your post and face punishment, and the punishment for desertion could range from loss of pay to imprisonment to creative medieval consequences that involve public humiliation. The rain is also loud. It drums on your chainmail, creating a constant metallic patter that combines with the splashing of water on stone and the rush of wind to create an overwhelming audio environment. Edmund has given up trying to communicate verbally. He just uses hand signals now because shouting over the rain isn't worth the effort. You're both wet, both miserable, both just trying to survive until shift change, which is still over 2 hours away. Your visibility is so compromised that you almost miss the actual legitimate security concern: a supply wagon approaching the gate. You can see it through the rain, a blurry shape moving along the road, and this is technically what you're here for, to observe and report traffic. You should signal Edmund, notify the gatehouse, follow the established protocols. Instead, you just watch dully as the wagon approaches, knowing that the gate guards below will handle it because that's their job and you're too cold and miserable to care about procedures right now. The wagon reaches the gate and there's a muffled exchange you can't hear through the rain. The gates open. Massive wooden doors that require multiple people to operate. Another task you're grateful isn't yours right now. The wagon enters the bailey and the gates close behind it. You've witnessed a successful security operation. You should feel some professional satisfaction. Instead, you're just envious of the wagon driver who gets to be inside the castle now, presumably heading towards somewhere warm and dry, while you're stuck out here for 2 more hours. Water is running down your back. You can feel it trickling along your spine, between your skin and your undertunic, following gravity and your body's contours in ways that are both ticklish and deeply uncomfortable. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't stop the rain, can't dry yourself, can't even wipe your face effectively because your hands are too wet to accomplish anything. You're just a human container for rainwater, slowly filling up from the outside while your body heat tries desperately to maintain core temperature against overwhelming opposition. The castle below is handling rain the way castles do, by becoming a muddy, miserable mess. The courtyard has transformed into a shallow lake with islands of slightly higher ground where people cluster, trying to minimize their exposure. The market vendors have packed up and left. The servants are moving between buildings in quick sprints, covering their heads with cloaks or baskets or whatever's available. Smart people are inside, doing inside things, making sensible life choices. You're outside, being a guard, making the opposite of sensible life choices. Your teeth are starting to chatter, which is your body's attempt to generate heat through muscle movement. It's not effective. Chattering teeth don't produce enough heat to counteract cold rain, but your body is trying its best with the limited tools evolution has provided. The chattering makes your jaw ache and creates this rhythmic clicking sound that you can hear even over the rain. You clench your jaw to stop it, which works briefly, but then the chattering starts again involuntarily because your body has decided this is happening whether you approve or not. Edmund has adopted a new patrol strategy, walking as fast as possible while maintaining safety, presumably on the theory that movement generates body heat. It's not wrong, but it's also exhausting when you're already 6 hours into a 12-hour shift wearing wet armor. You try to match his pace, but your legs are so tired and your boots are so waterlogged and your chainmail is so heavy with absorbed water that you can barely manage your normal walking speed, much less anything faster. The rain intensifies, which you didn't think was possible, but apparently weather has no lower limit on how miserable it can make things. The drops are bigger now, hitting with more force, and the wind has shifted to come directly at your face, which means you're walking into the rain rather than just being rained on. Your eyes are constantly full of water, making it hard to see where you're stepping. You're navigating partially by memory, partially by feel, partially by luck. This is when you understand why the guard mortality rate includes death by weather exposure. It's not dramatic or heroic. There's no enemy to fight, no glorious last stand. You just stand in the rain for too long, your body temperature drops too far, and eventually something critical stops working. Medieval medicine's response to hypothermia was basically warm the person up, which is solid advice but not helpful when you're required to stay in the cold rain for hours, and warming up isn't an option until your shift ends. Your patrol has become mechanical, automatic. Left foot, right foot, turn around, repeat. You're not thinking anymore, just moving, just existing in a state of pure endurance. The part of your brain that handles executive function has checked out for the duration, leaving only the basic motor functions and the grim determination to keep moving, because stopping means giving up, and giving up means you've failed at even this most basic of tasks. The castle walls are weeping. Water runs down the stone faces, finding cracks and channels worn by decades or centuries of rain. Some of the water comes through the parapet, seeping between stones where the mortar has deteriorated. Medieval masonry is impressive but not waterproof, and right now the entire structure feels like it's slowly dissolving around you, returning to the earth through gradual water erosion that will take centuries but is nonetheless happening in tiny increments with every storm. Time has become meaningless again, but in a different way than the boredom earlier. Then time was moving too slowly. Now it's not moving at all. You exist in an eternal present of being cold and wet, and the past and future have collapsed into this single moment that stretches infinitely in all directions. You were always cold and wet. You will always be cold and wet. There is no state of existence other than this. Edmund appears through the rain like a ghost, materializing from the gray curtain of precipitation. He looks terrible, skin pale, lips slightly blue, shivering visibly. You probably look the same. He makes a gesture, 2 fingers held up. 2 hours left. The information is both comforting and devastating. Only 2 hours, but also still 2 hours. 120 more minutes of this. 7,200 more seconds of rain. You nod acknowledgement and he disappears back into the rain, and you're alone again with the water and the wind and the stone and the slowly approaching moment when this shift will finally end and you can seek shelter and try to get warm and maybe, if you're lucky, not develop pneumonia from prolonged exposure to cold rain while wearing wet padding in an era before antibiotics. The rain continues. Your patrol continues. The suffering continues. Welcome to medieval weather warfare, where the enemy is the sky itself and there's no defense except endurance. You're 8 hours into your shift, soaked to the bone, and the sergeant has just appeared at the tower entrance. He's dry, which is the first thing you notice, completely dry, because he was inside while you were out here becoming a human water feature. He's carrying a small leather ledger and wearing an expression that suggests he's about to make your day significantly worse, which is impressive given that you're already standing in the rain wearing 40 pounds of wet medieval armor. "Inspection," he barks, which is somehow audible even over the downpour. This is not a scheduled inspection. This is the kind of surprise inspection that sergeants conduct when they're bored or angry or just feel like reminding guards that they have no control over their own lives. Edmund appears from his position, trudging toward the sergeant with the enthusiasm of someone walking to their own execution. You join them under the slight overhang at the tower entrance. Not really shelter, but marginally less exposed to rain. The sergeant looks you both up and down with the critical eye of someone whose job is to find fault, and finding fault with 2 soaking wet guards who've been on duty for 8 hours in progressively worse weather is not exactly challenging. "State of this," the sergeant mutters, gesturing at you generally. You're not sure if he means your soaked appearance, your obvious exhaustion, or your entire existence as a human being. Probably all 3. He steps closer, examining your equipment. Chainmail's rusting. Can see it from here. He's not wrong. Your chainmail is oxidizing in real time, the combination of water and iron creating rust stains that are visible even through the rain. This is technically your responsibility. Guards are supposed to maintain their equipment, but it's also completely inevitable when you're required to stand in rain for hours. There's no winning this interaction, just degrees of losing. Belts poorly maintained. He continues, poking at the leather with one dry finger. Sword scabbards splitting at the seam. Boots are. He looks down at your feet, which are standing in a puddle of their own creation. Disgusting. Edmund is getting the same treatment. The sergeant is cataloging every flaw, every sign of wear, every indication that you're both human beings subject to physical degradation rather than perfectly maintained military equipment. None of this is news to you. You're aware your gear is falling apart, but having it enumerated by someone who's dry and warm while you're cold and wet adds a special kind of insult to the existing injury. You know what I see when I look at you too? The sergeant asks, which is clearly rhetorical because he continues immediately. I see slackness. I see poor discipline. I see guards who think that just because it's raining, standards don't matter. This is profoundly unfair. You've been maintaining your patrol in conditions that would have driven sensible people indoors hours ago. You've been standing your post despite being cold, wet, exhausted, and miserable. But fairness isn't part of the medieval management philosophy. The sergeant's job is to maintain discipline through criticism and intimidation, and your job is to accept that criticism regardless of its validity because he has authority and you don't. Sir, Edmund says carefully, we've been. Did I ask you to speak? The sergeant's voice could cut glass. No, I did not. When I want your opinion, I'll beat it out of you. This is apparently meant to be funny because the sergeant smirks slightly, but neither you nor Edmund laugh because humor requires a baseline level of comfort and dignity that you both lost somewhere around hour 4 of your shift. You just stand there, dripping and shivering, waiting for this interaction to end. The sergeant opens his ledger, which is somehow still dry despite the rain, suggesting he's been holding it under his cloak. He makes notes with a piece of charcoal. Ink would run in this weather. Both of you are being docked half a day's pay for improper equipment maintenance. Edmund, you're additionally cited for. He pauses, searching for something. Poor posture during patrol. Saw you slouching against the parapet earlier. Edmund's face goes carefully blank, which is the only safe response when someone with authority is making up infractions. Arguing would just add insubordination to the list of offenses. You're learning in real time that medieval hierarchies function on arbitrary power dynamics where those above you can punish you for essentially anything, and your only recourse is to accept it and hope you survive long enough to eventually have your own subordinates to abuse. You, the sergeant says, pointing at you with his charcoal stick. Your section of wall. The cracked stone. Why wasn't that reported? This is the stone Edmund showed you earlier, the one with the visible crack that was already there before your shift started. You're being held responsible for structural damage that predates your arrival, which is exactly the kind of administrative logic that makes medieval guard work special. Sir, it was... You begin, but he cuts you off. It was your responsibility to report it immediately upon noticing it. Castle maintenance is everyone's job. That crack could widen, stone could fall, someone could get hurt, and it would be your fault for not reporting it promptly. The stone is still there, still cracked, still not fixed, which suggests that reporting it earlier wouldn't have changed anything except perhaps getting you in trouble sooner. But this logic is irrelevant in the face of hierarchical authority. The sergeant is right because he's the sergeant, and you're wrong because you're a guard, and that's the entire basis of medieval workplace disputes. Historians still argue whether medieval institutions had formal grievance procedures, but evidence suggests that the grievance procedure consisted of accept your punishment and be grateful it wasn't worse. There's no HR department to appeal to, no union representative to advocate for you, no system of checks and balances. There's just a chain of command, and you're at the bottom of it, which means you absorb abuse from above with no recourse except privately imagining scenarios where the sergeant falls into a cesspit. That'll be another day's pay. The sergeant continues, making another note. For failure to report structural hazards in a timely manner. You've now lost a day and a half of pay, roughly 3 days' worth of food, or 2 weeks' worth of ale, or most of a month's worth of anything resembling discretionary spending. This is how medieval employment worked. They paid you barely enough to survive, then found reasons to take portions of that payback through fines and penalties, creating a system where you were perpetually in debt or barely breaking even. Some guards spent years working without ever accumulating savings because the combination of low wages and arbitrary fines meant they were constantly cycling between almost comfortable and nearly starving. The sergeant closes his ledger with a wet slap. Both of you will report for extra drill practice tomorrow morning before your shift. Maybe we can fix this slackness with additional training. This means you'll be waking up even earlier tomorrow, probably around 3:30 a.m., to spend an hour doing combat drills while exhausted from today's shift, then immediately starting another 12-hour guard duty. The purpose isn't to actually improve your skills. It's to punish you through sleep deprivation and additional physical hardship. Medieval discipline was less about correction and more about suffering. And clean your equipment properly before tomorrow, the sergeant adds. I want to see those chainmail rings shining. If I see rust tomorrow, we'll have another conversation about standards and discipline. He turns to leave, then pauses and looks back. Oh, and the kitchen reported short rations tonight. Some problem with the supply wagon. You'll both be getting half portions at evening meal. This is the information that finally breaks through your exhausted numbness. Half portions means you'll be going to bed hungry, which means you'll wake up even more depleted tomorrow, which means tomorrow's shift will be even harder. The supply shortage is probably real. Medieval logistics were unreliable at best. But the timing feels deliberate, like the universe has decided that you specifically need to suffer more. The sergeant disappears into the tower, leaving you and Edmund standing in the rain, significantly poorer and facing additional punishment tomorrow for infractions that were largely beyond your control. Neither of you speaks for a long moment. What is there to say? You're trapped in a system that treats you as disposable labor, and complaining won't change anything except possibly make things worse if the sergeant hears about it. Could be worse, Edmund finally says, which is his standard response to all adversity. You want to ask how, specifically, this could be worse, but he'd find examples. Being whipped, being imprisoned, being dismissed without pay, being conscripted for actual military service where people try to kill you instead of just making you miserable. Medieval life offered unlimited opportunities for things to get worse, which meant any situation that wasn't the absolute worst could technically be described as good. You return to your patrol, now not only cold and wet but also financially penalized and facing tomorrow's punishment with the grim certainty that this cycle will continue indefinitely. The sergeant will find new reasons to dock pay, invent new infractions, assign new punishments, because that's his role in the hierarchy, and your role is to absorb it while maintaining the fiction that you're a professional military asset rather than an exploited laborer in medieval armor. The social nightmare of guard work isn't just the physical hardship or the boredom or the weather. It's the constant reminder that you're at the bottom of a rigid hierarchy where everyone above you has both the authority and the apparent inclination to make your life worse. The sergeant reports to the captain, who reports to the castellan, who reports to the lord, and at each level people are exercising their power over subordinates because that's how medieval authority works. It's not personal, you're not being singled out for special cruelty, it's just structural. This is what being a common guard means in a feudal system. Edmund has resumed his position and you can see him moving with slightly more urgency, probably worried that the sergeant might still be watching from some concealed position, ready to cite more infractions. This is another joy of hierarchical surveillance. You never know when you're being observed, so you have to always assume you're being judged, which adds psychological stress to the existing physical misery. You think about the lord of this castle, who's probably sitting somewhere warm right now, maybe in front of a fireplace, eating an elaborate meal prepared by professional cooks, wearing dry clothes, making decisions about his estates and his political alliances and his tournament participation. He's aware guards exist in the way that people are aware that furniture exists, necessary for function beneath notice as individuals. You could die tomorrow from exposure or illness or accident, and he might not even be informed. Guards are replaceable. There are always more desperate people willing to stand in the rain for poverty wages. This is the part that makes medieval social hierarchy especially brutal. It's not secret or hidden. Everyone understands their place. You know you're disposable. The sergeant knows he's only marginally less disposable. The captain knows the same. All the way up the chain, everyone understands that they exist to serve those above them, and the only compensation is that most people have someone below them to make miserable in turn. Except you're at the bottom, which means you receive abuse from above and have no one below to pass it on to except maybe the castle rats, and they're too quick to catch. The rain continues. Your patrol continues. The hierarchical oppression continues. You're cold, wet, financially penalized, and facing additional punishment tomorrow, and your remaining shift is still. You calculate quickly. 3 hours and 45 minutes. Edmund catches your eye during a pass and makes a throat-cutting gesture, which is his elegant way of expressing that this job is killing you both slowly and there's nothing either of you can do about it except die slowly or quit and die quickly from starvation. You nod agreement. What else is there to say? The castle walls loom above you, built on the backs of workers who are also disposable, maintained by guards who are also disposable, defending a lord who sees you all as human equipment to be used until broken and then replaced. This is your workplace. This is your life. This is what you're defending with your cold, wet, miserable existence. Welcome to the bottom of medieval social hierarchy, where the only certainty is that tomorrow will be exactly as bad as today, and the only hope is that maybe someday you'll be promoted to a position where you can make someone else just as miserable as you are now. The sun has set and you're now patrolling in darkness so complete that you literally cannot see your hand when you hold it 6 inches from your face. This isn't the darkness you experience in a modern city, where streetlights and building illumination create ambient glow that lets you navigate. This isn't even the darkness of a power outage in the suburbs, where you still have moonlight and distant lights creating some baseline visibility. This is medieval rural darkness. Absolute, primal, the kind of darkness that made ancient humans huddle around fires and invent religions to explain what might be lurking just beyond the light. There is no moon tonight, or if there is, it's hidden behind the storm clouds that are still dumping rain on you with relentless consistency. The castle has a few torches mounted in brackets along the walls, but they're spaced far apart, maybe one every 100 feet, because torches and lamp oil are expensive and lords don't waste resources on guard comfort. The torches that do exist are struggling in the rain, producing flickering light that creates more shadows than it eliminates, turning the castle architecture into a nightmarish landscape of moving shapes and uncertain depths. Your night vision should be adapting, but it can't because the scattered torchlight keeps resetting it. Every time you pass near a torch, your pupils contract from the brightness. Then you walk into darkness and spend several minutes effectively blind while your eyes readjust. Then you approach another torch and the cycle repeats. It's like someone is randomly turning the lights on and off while you try to navigate an obstacle course in a storm, which is essentially what's happening. Edmund has vanished into the darkness somewhere ahead of you. You know he's out there because you can occasionally hear the metallic jingle of his chainmail or the splash of his boots in puddles. But visually he's gone, swallowed by the night. You're walking your patrol route by memory now, counting steps and using the wall's edge as a guide. Running your left hand along the parapet stones to maintain orientation while gripping your spear with your right hand. This is genuinely terrifying in ways that daylight shift could never be. During the day, you could see threats approaching. You could see the ground beneath your feet, the stones you were walking on, the drop on either side. Now you're walking on a narrow, elevated pathway in complete darkness. In the rain, while wearing slippery boots and heavy armor, with no safety equipment and no backup plan if something goes wrong. One misstep, one patch of unexpected moss, one loose stone, and you're falling 40 feet to a landing that will definitely ruin your evening and possibly end your existence. Your other senses are compensating for the lack of vision, which means you're suddenly hyper-aware of sounds. The rain drumming on stone and metal creates a constant white noise backdrop. Underneath that, you can hear wind whistling through arrow slits and crenellations, water dripping and flowing everywhere, your own breathing heavy and stressed, your heartbeat elevated from constant low-level fear, the creak of leather and jingle of metal from your equipment. Every sound is amplified, cataloged, analyzed by a brain that's desperately trying to build a mental picture of your environment from audio cues alone. You hear something ahead, not Edmund's normal patrol sounds, but something else, a scraping noise like stone on stone. You freeze, grip your spear tighter, and try to pierce the darkness with eyes that are useless. The scraping continues for a few seconds, then stops. Could be a loose stone shifting in the rain. Could be an animal. Rats are common in castles and they sound surprisingly large in the dark. Could be something else. Your imagination, fed by exhaustion and stress, and every ghost story you've ever heard around guardroom fires, is helpfully suggesting alternatives. Intruders scaling the wall, spirits of dead guards, creatures from folk tales that hunt in the dark. Medieval people were deeply superstitious about the night, and standing here in absolute darkness on a castle wall, you understand why. The night feels actively hostile, full of unseen threats and unknowable dangers. Every culture had night demons and dark spirits because when you can't see what's around you, your brain fills in the blanks with fears. You know intellectually that it's probably just a rat or loose masonry, but your hindbrain, the ancient part that kept your ancestors alive when saber-toothed cats hunted at night, is screaming that danger is present and you should be afraid. You force yourself to keep moving, shuffling forward with small steps, testing each footfall before committing your weight. Your hand never leaves the parapet because it's your only reference point in the darkness. The stones are rough, cold, slick with rain, but there's solid reality in a world that's become uncertain and threatening. You count steps because counting gives you a sense of progress and control. 1, 2, 3, 4. Something brushes against your leg and you nearly jump out of your armor. Your heart hammers, adrenaline floods your system, and you've raised your spear in a defensive position before your conscious mind catches up and realizes it was just your scabbard swinging forward when you stopped suddenly. You're fighting your own equipment now in addition to everything else. Your hands are shaking from cold, from fear, from exhaustion, from all of it combined into one trembling mess. You hear Edmund ahead, calling out the challenge. Who goes? This is standard protocol when you hear someone approaching in the dark. You challenge them to identify themselves before they get close enough to be dangerous. You respond with the countersign, Friend, it's me. Your voice sounds strange in the darkness, smaller and more uncertain than you intended. Edmund appears from the blackness like a ghost, visible only when he's within arm's reach. Nearly stabbed you, he says conversationally, as if this is normal and acceptable. Couldn't see anything, heard metal, figured it was either you or someone who needed stabbing. This is your workplace safety standard for night shifts. Don't accidentally stab your coworkers, and if you do, it's an understandable mistake given the conditions. The fact that Edmund is joking about it suggests this has happened before or nearly happened, and everyone just accepts it as part of night duty in a medieval castle. Seeing anything? You ask, which is almost funny because obviously neither of you can see anything. Shapes, Edmund says. Heard something in the courtyard earlier. Probably dogs. Or ghosts. Hard to tell. He's not entirely joking about ghosts. Medieval people believed in them absolutely, And guards on night duty were the most likely to report supernatural encounters because guards on night duty were standing alone in the dark for hours, exhausted and stressed, with sensory deprivation and active imaginations. Every unexplained sound became potential evidence of the supernatural. Every shadow became a possible spirit. Every bout of sleep deprivation hallucination became a legitimate encounter with the otherworld. And speaking of hallucinations, you're starting to see things at the edge of your vision. Little movements, shapes that aren't quite there when you turn to look directly. This is your visual cortex trying to process insufficient information, creating patterns from noise, interpreting darkness as if it contains objects. It's normal, it's not supernatural, but it's deeply unsettling because you can't trust your own senses anymore. Is that movement real or imagined? Is that shape a person or a shadow or nothing at all? You don't know, and not knowing is psychologically exhausting. The temperature has dropped with nightfall, and now you're not just wet and cold, you're dangerously cold. Your core temperature is dropping, your extremities are numb, and you're showing signs of mild hypothermia. Confusion, clumsiness, slurred speech when you talk to Edmund. Medieval people didn't understand the physiology, but they knew that being cold and wet for too long could kill you, and you're experiencing the early stages of that process in real time. Your patrol has become treacherous. You're shuffling rather than walking, taking tiny steps to minimize the chance of tripping. Your boots are completely waterlogged and your feet have gone past pain into complete numbness. You can't feel your toes anymore, which means you're walking on nerveless stumps and hoping your legs remember how walking works. The chainmail seems heavier than it did earlier, like it somehow absorbed the darkness and added that to its weight. Every movement is effortful, every step a conscious decision to continue rather than just collapsing where you stand. Historians still argue whether medieval guards ever actually fell asleep on duty, but standing here in the cold darkness, you understand how it could happen. Your body is screaming for rest. Your brain is foggy from exhaustion and cold, and staying awake requires active effort. You could so easily just lean against the parapet, rest your eyes for a moment, and drift off. The consequences of being caught sleeping on duty are severe, possibly whipping, definitely loss of pay, but those are abstract future punishments, while sleep is an immediate desperate need. You pinch yourself hard, dig your fingernails into your palm, trying to use pain to stay alert. It works for maybe 5 minutes before the urgency fades and you're back to fighting the overwhelming desire to just close your eyes. You start walking faster, hoping movement will generate enough alertness to keep you functional, but faster is dangerous in the dark on slippery stones. A torch gutters out somewhere behind you, and the darkness becomes marginally darker, which you didn't think was possible. The loss of even that small light source is disorienting. You're now navigating by touch and memory and prayer, hoping you don't encounter the cracked stone that the sergeant cited you for earlier, because in the dark you won't see it until you step on it and it gives way beneath you. Edmund has started singing again, probably using the same strategy you are. Stay active, make noise, do anything to maintain consciousness. His song is even more off-key than usual, slurred from cold and exhaustion. But it's sound. It's human. It's proof that you're not alone out here in the darkness. You try to join in on the chorus, but you can't remember the words and your teeth are chattering too hard to form clear syllables. Something large splashes in the courtyard below. Too large to be a rat. Definitely something bigger. A dog maybe, or a pig that escaped its pen, or possibly a drunk person who chose a terrible time to stumble around outside. You peer over the parapet but see absolutely nothing, just darkness and the sound of rain. Whatever it was, it's not your problem unless it tries to climb the wall, and honestly, if something did try to climb the wall right now, you're not confident you could stop it. You can barely maintain your own position on this wall, much less defend it against attackers. Your shift ends in approximately 1 hour, which feels simultaneously close and infinitely far away. 1 hour is 60 minutes is 3,600 seconds of continuing to exist in this state of cold, wet, blind exhaustion. You're counting down now, bargaining with time itself. If I can make it to 55 minutes remaining, I'm almost done. If I can make it to 30 minutes, that's just 2 trips to Edmund and back. If I can make it to 15 minutes, I can start heading toward the tower where relief guards will meet us. The darkness is playing tricks on your hearing now too. You're hearing voices in the wind, footsteps that aren't there, your name being called by no one. This is your brain misfiring from stress and exhaustion, creating auditory hallucinations to match the visual ones. Medieval guards probably interpreted these as supernatural communication. Voices of dead comrades, warnings from saints, demonic whispers. You know they're hallucinations, but knowing doesn't make them less convincing or less disturbing. Edmund appears from the darkness, moving faster than usual. "Heard something," he says urgently. "On the wall, ahead of your position." Your adrenaline spikes, cutting through the fog of exhaustion. This is it, actual potential threat, the thing you're supposedly here to defend against. You grip your spear, try to look alert and professional despite being unable to see anything. What kind of something? Footsteps, metal sounds. Could be the relief guard coming early. Could be something else. You both stand still, listening. The rain makes it nearly impossible to isolate specific sounds. But yes, there's something. Rhythmic, metallic, approaching from the direction of the tower. Could be guards. Could be someone who shouldn't be here. Challenge protocol, you're supposed to call out before they get too close. Who goes? You shout into the darkness, trying to sound authoritative rather than terrified. A pause, then a response. Relief guard, you deaf idiot, your shift's over. It's the most beautiful sentence you've heard all day. Your shift is over. You've survived. 12 hours of cold, rain, boredom, fear, darkness, and progressive physical degradation, and you made it through. The relief guards emerge from the darkness. 2 shadowy figures who look exactly as miserable as you feel, because they're about to start the night shift that you're finishing. The handover is brief. "Anything to report?" "Everything's terrible," Edmund says. "Cracked stone at the 30-foot mark. Already reported. Rain's not stopping. Can't see anything. Good luck." And then you're walking toward the tower, toward shelter, toward the end of this shift. Your legs barely work, you're shaking from cold, you can't feel your feet, but you're moving toward relief, and that's enough. Edmund is beside you, equally shattered, both of you just surviving the last few minutes of this ordeal. You reach the tower entrance and descend the spiral stairs, which is treacherous because your legs are shaking and the stairs are wet and you still can't see properly. But you're inside now, out of the rain, in the relative shelter of stone walls. The guardroom is ahead, dry clothes, possibly food, definitely sleep. You've survived your first complete shift of castle guard duty. It was worse than you imagined, harder than you thought possible, and tomorrow you get to do it all again. But tonight you get to sleep, and in this moment, that's everything. You stumble into the guardroom, that familiar stone chamber you left 17 hours ago, and immediately realize that rest is a relative term in medieval castle life. The room hasn't magically improved during your shift. It's still cold, still damp, still smells like unwashed bodies and mildew and despair. Your straw mattress is still there, looking exactly as uninviting as it did this morning, which feels like several lifetimes ago. Other guards are scattered around the room in various states of consciousness. Some sleeping, some just collapsed. One guy sitting in the corner staring at nothing with the expression of someone whose soul has temporarily vacated the premises. The first challenge is getting out of your wet armor, which proves more difficult than getting into it was. Your fingers are still numb from cold, making fine motor control nearly impossible. The leather straps that hold your equipment together have swollen from water absorption, turning simple buckles into complex puzzles. You fumble with your belt for a solid 2 minutes before managing to get it unbuckled, and it falls to the floor with a wet thud that sounds like a small animal dying. Edmund is having similar struggles. You watch him try to remove his chainmail coif, that hood of metal rings that covers his head and neck, and he gets it halfway off before it catches on something, and he's just stuck there, partially trapped in his own armor, too exhausted to problem solve effectively. You help him, pulling the coif free with a jangling rustle of metal, and he returns the favor by helping you lift your chainmail hauberk over your head. This is an ordeal. The hauberk has absorbed so much water that it probably weighs 50 pounds now instead of its usual 35. The metal is cold against your skin as it slides upward, and lifting your arms above your head to let Edmund pull it off requires muscle strength you're not sure you still possess. Your shoulders scream in protest. They've been supporting this weight for 12 hours and they're not interested in cooperating anymore. But eventually the chainmail comes free, leaving you standing in just your soaking gambeson and undertunic. The relief is immediate and profound. Without the chainmail's weight, you feel almost weightless, like you might float away. Your shoulders can finally drop from the hunched position they've been locked in all day. You can breathe more deeply because there's no longer a metal cage restricting your chest expansion. You could almost cry from the simple joy of not carrying 35 pounds of armor, except you're too dehydrated from your shift to produce tears. The gambeson comes off next, and this is disgusting. The padded jacket is utterly saturated, heavy with water and sweat and probably some other fluids you don't want to think about. Peeling it off your body makes a wet squelching sound, and underneath, your undertunic is plastered to your skin, cold and clammy and completely see-through. You're shivering violently now. Your body has been suppressing the shivering while you were working, but now that you're no longer moving, the cold is hitting you with full force. Medieval people didn't have the concept of changing into dry clothes immediately the way we do, partly because most people only owned 1 or 2 sets of clothes, and partly because there was no efficient way to dry wet clothing quickly. You have a spare undertunic. Technically it's your clean one, though clean is relative when you last washed it 2 weeks ago, and you pull it on with shaking hands. It's dry, which makes it infinitely better than what you were wearing, but it's not warm. The stone walls of the guardroom are radiating cold, and without any heating source, the room temperature is maybe 50 degrees at best. Your wet clothes need to be hung up to dry, which means draping them over any available surface. Hooks on the wall, the edges of benches, someone's already drying clothes because there's not enough space for everyone's stuff. The guardroom becomes a maze of damp fabric, creating humidity that makes the whole room feel like a medieval greenhouse except growing mold instead of plants. Your chainmail needs attention too. It should be dried and oiled to prevent rust. But you literally don't have the energy. You just drop it in a heap next to your mattress and tell yourself you'll deal with it tomorrow, which is what you told yourself yesterday, which is why your chainmail is progressively deteriorating. Food is next on your priority list because you haven't eaten since the midday meal, and that was half rations due to the supply shortage the sergeant mentioned. The castle provides 1 more meal for guards after evening shift, usually bread and whatever stew or pottage the kitchen has left over. You make your way down corridors and stairs toward the kitchen building, still shivering, your wet boots squelching with every step because you haven't taken them off yet because your feet are so swollen and numb that you're afraid of what you'll find when you finally remove them. The kitchen is warm, gloriously, beautifully warm, because the cooking fires have been burning all day and the residual heat is still radiating from the massive stone hearth. You could stay here forever, just standing in the warmth, letting your core temperature slowly climb back toward normal. Other guards have the same idea, and there's a small cluster of damp, miserable-looking people huddled near the hearth like medieval penguins trying to share body heat. The food situation is exactly as bad as promised. A kitchen servant, a tired woman who looks like she's been on her feet for 16 hours because she probably has, ladles thin stew into wooden bowls. The stew is more accurately described as hot water with vegetable memories, with a few chunks of something that might be turnip floating in it. You also get a piece of bread, but it's the hard, dark stuff that requires serious jaw strength to chew. And your jaw is so tired from 12 hours of cold that made you clench your teeth that biting into hard bread feels like punishment. You eat anyway because calories are calories and your body desperately needs fuel. The stew is bland. Medieval commoner food was notoriously underseasoned because spices were expensive and nobody was wasting them on guard rations. But it's hot, and hot food after a cold shift is better than good food in comfortable conditions. The warmth spreads through your chest and stomach, and for the first time in hours, you feel almost human. Edmund is next to you, eating with the mechanical efficiency of someone who's too tired to taste anything. Around you, other guards eat in silence. Nobody has the energy for conversation. You're all just refueling, trying to take in enough nutrition to survive tomorrow's shift, knowing that tomorrow you'll be back on the wall doing exactly the same thing. The meal takes maybe 10 minutes, and then you're trudging back to the guardroom because sleep is calling with an urgency that's almost painful. Your body has been running on adrenaline and stubbornness for hours, and now that you're finally safe and fed, all of that borrowed energy is evaporating. Your legs are shaking as you climb the stairs back to the guard quarters. Your eyes are trying to close while you walk. You're navigating mostly by memory and touch because your brain has started shutting down non-essential functions in preparation for unconsciousness. Back in the guardroom, you finally deal with your boots. This requires sitting on your mattress and trying to pull wet leather off swollen feet, which is harder than it sounds. The boots don't want to come off. They've molded themselves to your feet through hours of wear and water absorption. You pull and twist, and eventually the first boot comes free with a sucking sound, followed immediately by the worst smell you've experienced today, which is saying something because you've been in a guardroom with 15 unwashed men. Your foot is pale, wrinkled from prolonged water exposure, and covered in blisters. Some of the blisters have already popped, leaving raw patches that sting when air hits them. Your toes are still numb, which is concerning because feeling should be returning now that you're warming up. You wiggle them experimentally and feel pins and needles starting. That painful prickling sensation as nerve endings wake up and express their displeasure with how they've been treated. The second boot comes off with equal difficulty, revealing an equally damaged foot. You now understand why Edmund complains constantly about his bunions. This job destroys feet. Medieval guards who survived for years developed feet that looked like gnarled tree roots, covered in calluses and old scars and permanent deformities from wearing poorly fitted boots 12 hours a day. Your feet are well on their way to joining that tradition. You should probably do something about the blisters, clean them, bandage them, apply some kind of treatment. Medieval medical care for minor wounds was variable in quality, ranging from genuinely helpful folk remedies to absolutely useless superstitious rituals. The guardroom has a communal medicine box that contains some strips of cloth for bandaging, some kind of salve that smells like rancid fat and herbs, and probably several diseases waiting to be transmitted through shared medical supplies. You're too tired to care. You'll deal with your feet tomorrow or the next day or never. Right now, sleep is the only thing that matters. You stretch out on your straw mattress, which crackles and pokes through the thin cloth covering, and immediately every muscle in your body begins screaming. This is the paradox of extreme physical exertion. When you're moving, you can push through the pain, but as soon as you stop, your body presents you with an itemized bill for all the damage you've done. Your shoulders ache from carrying armor. Your back aches from standing and walking for 12 hours. Your legs are cramping, sharp, painful spasms in your calves and thighs. Your feet throb with every heartbeat. Your hands are stiff and sore from gripping your spear. Your neck is tight from hunching against wind and rain. There is not a single part of you that doesn't hurt in some way. The mattress offers no comfort because it's just straw in a cloth sack, providing maybe an inch of padding between you and the wooden platform underneath. Medieval people had different standards for comfort than we do, and not sleeping directly on stone floor counted as luxury. You shift around trying to find a position that doesn't put pressure on something that hurts, which is impossible because everything hurts, so you eventually just pick the least bad position and commit to it. The room is full of sounds. Other guards snoring, someone coughing wetly in the corner, the constant drip of water from drying clothes, rats scratching in the walls, wind whistling through gaps in the stone. Medieval buildings were drafty by modern standards, and the guardroom has several places where outside air comes in freely, creating cold spots and making it impossible to ever feel truly warm even when you're indoors. You pull your thin blanket over yourself, wool, scratchy, smelling like previous users, and try to generate some body heat. The blanket is barely adequate for spring weather and completely insufficient for a cold, damp night after 12 hours in the rain. You're still shivering, though whether from cold or exhaustion or lingering adrenaline is unclear. Your mind won't shut off. Despite being exhausted, you're also wired, replaying the shift in fragmented memories. The pre-dawn muster, the cold wind on the wall, the sergeant's inspection, the rain, the darkness, the fear of falling, the hallucinations, the overwhelming boredom punctuated by moments of terror. You're experiencing what we'd now recognize as the come down from prolonged stress. But medieval people just called it not being able to sleep after a hard shift. Edmund is already unconscious on his mattress nearby, snoring with the intensity of someone whose body has simply shut down regardless of comfort or conditions. You're jealous of his ability to just pass out immediately. You're lying here, cold and uncomfortable and exhausted, but your brain is still processing the day's events, still running through everything that went wrong, still anxious about tomorrow. Because tomorrow is coming. In approximately 7 hours, you'll need to wake up for extra drill practice as punishment for today's infractions. Then immediately after that, you'll start another 12-hour shift. And the day after that, another shift. And the next day, and the next, stretching forward in an endless succession of cold walls and boredom and rain and darkness and progressive physical deterioration. This is your life now. This is what you signed up for when you became a castle guard, though signed up implies you had meaningful alternatives when really your choices were this or starvation. Medieval economic mobility was largely a myth for common people. You were born into a social class, and that's generally where you stayed unless you got extremely lucky or died trying to change your circumstances. You think about the lord of the castle again, sleeping in his comfortable chambers with actual heating and soft mattresses and servants to attend to his needs. You think about the merchants in town who get to work indoors and go home to their families at night. You think about the farmers who have hard lives too, but at least they're working towards something, growing food, raising animals, building something tangible. You're a guard. Your job is to stand on walls and watch for threats that rarely materialize, protecting people who don't know your name, for wages that barely keep you alive. Your body is finally starting to relax, the adrenaline draining away, the exhaustion overwhelming the discomfort. Your thoughts are becoming disconnected, fragmentary. Need to oil chainmail. Feet hurt, so cold. Tomorrow drill practice. Shouldn't have become a guard. Should have been a monk. Monks have beds. Monks have books, but monks have to pray all the time. Rather pray than patrol. Maybe prayer would be easier. The sounds of the guardroom fade. The cold recedes. The pain becomes distant. You're drifting now, consciousness slipping away, finally surrendering to sleep after 19 hours of being awake. Your last coherent thought is that tomorrow you'll wake up and do this all again, and the day after that, and the day after that, until either you die or your contract ends or you develop enough seniority to get a slightly less terrible posting. This is medieval guard duty. This is what awaits anyone who thought castle life might be romantic or adventurous or anything other than brutal, grinding, day-to-day survival. The walls need guarding, and someone has to stand on them in the cold and the rain and the darkness. And that someone is you, and tomorrow you'll do it all again because that's the contract, that's the job, that's life at the bottom of the medieval social hierarchy. Sleep finally takes you, pulling you down into dreamless unconsciousness where, for a few precious hours, you don't have to be cold or wet or in pain or worried about tomorrow. And tomorrow will come anyway, inevitable as sunrise, bringing another shift, another patrol, another day of slowly breaking down one cold stone step at a time. The darkness of the guardroom wraps around you like a rough blanket, and you sink deeper into that well-earned rest, knowing somewhere in the back of your mind that the morning bell will ring too soon, that your feet will still hurt, that the chainmail will still be damp. But for now, in this moment, none of that matters. You're horizontal, you're still, you're safe, and sleep is carrying you away to somewhere beyond the cold stone walls. Your breathing slows, deepens, your muscles finally release their tension, and you drift into the kind of sleep that comes only after true exhaustion. Complete, total, your body taking what it desperately needs, while outside the walls, other guards begin their night shifts, walking the same patrols you just finished, and the castle stands through another night, defended by tired people in rusty armor, doing an unglamorous job that someone has to do. And you sleep, deeply, dreamlessly, until morning comes too soon, as it always does, bringing another day, another shift, another chapter in the endless story of castle guard duty, where the only certainty is that tomorrow will be exactly like today. Cold walls, long hours, the grinding routine of medieval military service. But tonight, for these few precious hours, you rest, you recover, you exist in that blessed space between shifts, where the only thing expected of you is simply to breathe, to sleep, to let your body heal enough to survive tomorrow. Sweet dreams, brave guard. You've earned them, every single moment of them,